Dr. Jones, what can you tell me about that arch there?
This one?
Yeah.
There's a story, let me tell you. This was actually the doorway to the building that was the original structure for the school that was a predecessor to Westchester University. Oh. All right. It was built back in 1872 and stood on this site here where New Main Hall is located until 1972 when it was knocked down. They salvaged this and put it over here as kind of a monument for the 175th anniversary of the university. This plaque gives you a lot of the details about it, or at least some of the details, alrighty, and also a picture of what the building used to look like. In its day, it was the largest serpentine stone structure in the entire world.
Standing 4 stories high, Old Main was built in 1871 to meet the requirements of the Normal School Act passed by the Pennsylvania State Legislature in 1857. Its purpose was to encourage the creation of normal schools like those used in France to train teachers. The state promised teaching certificates to graduates of a normal school as long as it met certain requirements. A school needed a building that was large enough to serve at least 300 students and a hall that could accommodate 1,000 people. It also had to offer a model school where at least 100 students could practice teaching. Residents of Westchester operated private schools since the beginning of the 19th century, and once the Civil War ended, they began to show interest in the new legislation. In early 1869, a group of prominent citizens met to organize a normal school company. They raised $50,000 by selling stock and another $28,000 from the sale of the Westchester Academy.
So they raised $78,000 from stockholders here in the borough, but that still wasn't enough. All right, but through a combination of loans from the state and from other people, they got together just over $100,000, which is worth about $1.3 million in modern terms. All right. With that, they bought 10 acres of land on a hill and here south of town, all right, and constructed the building that became the heart of the old normal school, Old Main Hall.
Commissioned to design the building was Addison Hutton, a well-known architect from Philadelphia whose work included the Philadelphia Savings Fund Society building and Parish Hall, the first building of Swarthmore College.
Now, when Addison Hutton was designing this building, he chose to build it out of serpentine, a type of naturally green sedimentary rock composed mostly of magnesium and iron. Serpentine is indigenous to Chester County and was readily available from Brinton's Quarry, located a few miles south of town. Builders received an official contract to construct the building, which by the end would measure 150 feet wide by 112 feet deep.
The contractors broke ground in September 1870. The work was completed in less than a year, allowing the Westchester Normal School to open with 156 students on September 25, 1871. Enrollment grew rapidly and the building became too small, so the north wing was added in 1880 and the south wing in 1882. A year later, a new building went up behind Old Main, providing a science classroom, a new boiler room, and a laundry.
I'm standing in Main Hall right now. Well, the new Main Hall. 140 years ago, this was the site of Old Main Hall. Now, today the first floor just has a lobby and some classrooms, but back then in Old Main, the first floor had a kitchen, a dining room, and a meeting hall. Classrooms, as we would know them, were located on the second floor along with a chapel. Dormitories for 150 students were located on the third and fourth floors, along with washrooms, bathrooms, and there were some other rooms in the basement for the cooks and other staff. The entire building had steam heat and gas lighting, which at the time were the most modern technologies available.
There were many rules that governed the lives of the students who lived in Old Main. In the early years, the dress code required skirts for women and ties for men while at dinner, and students were required to wear slippers while upstairs so that their shoes didn't damage the wooden floors. Every student was required to attend chapel on Sunday morning, and men and women were forbidden to meet outside of the chapel. All students were prohibited from going into town without permission, and naturally, tobacco was forbidden, as was alcohol.
I'm standing outside of Recitation Hall right now, which, as you can see, is one of the few buildings on campus that still has the original serpentine material. And what happened was, students would actually use the construction of these old buildings to their advantage. Back in the day in Old Main Hall, the most agile students, mostly male, would climb out of the windows of their dormitories and use this concrete lip here as a handhold. they would crawl hand over hand all the way around the corner into another window, gaining entry into a dorm of the opposite sex. It might not have been related to the curriculum, but I don't doubt that these students were getting an education in something.
So even though this was originally outside of town, by the 1890s that wasn't true anymore. The State Normal School got its first telephone in 1885, and then in 1891 the Westchester Street Railway built a trolley line that came all the way down High Street and ended right in front of Old Main Hall. Students used to use that to get up to the center of town, to the train station. From there they could go home to Philadelphia or go as far away as Washington, D.C. on excursions.
By the end of the century, Old Main was no longer large enough for an enrollment which had grown to nearly 1,000. The Normal School embarked on a building program that added a gymnasium, a new model school, a new classroom building, and a library. With growth came concerns about student discipline, and in 1911, the board arranged for the construction of a new dormitory called Wayne Hall. Old Main became the women's dormitory, while the men were moved into Wayne. That was just the first of many changes that turned the Normal School into a state college by 1960. Enrollment doubled after World War II, and then more than quadrupled by the end of the 1960s, when more than 9,000 students marched to classes in the shadow of Old Main. More than a dozen new buildings were also constructed, and as the State College prepared to celebrate its 100th anniversary, a battle broke out over whether Old Main should be saved or replaced.
Opponents argued that it would cost about $9 million to modernize Old Main, and it would be cheaper to just tear it down and build something else. Now, considering the heating, lighting, and plumbing systems were all out of date and inefficient, they may have been right. Nonetheless, the Save Old Main movement put a lot of pressure on the Board of Trustees. And still, despite students and faculty's best efforts, they couldn't persuade the legislature to save it.
By the time the dust settled and the rubble was hauled away, all that remained was the doorway, which was slated for reuse as the door to New Main Hall. Even that failed to happen, but the pieces were saved, and the old doorway was erected as a monument to its predecessor, just in time for the university's 125th anniversary.
So the only thing that really remains from Old Main Hall is, of course, New Main Hall, but there's this portrait and this plaque as well. But I know for the people who went to school here, who lived through the period of its demolition, they have some memories that are going to last for a real long time.